He rejected his daughter for being ugly, but years later, she became a top model. As a little girl, she was cast aside by the very man who was supposed to love her most. But when fate gave her a chance on the runway, the world saw something her father never did. Her rise was breathtaking, her courage unstoppable, until the past came crashing back. Because sitting in the judge's chair was the man who once called her worthless. Now, the spotlight burns brighter than ever, but will she finally win his respect, or prove to the world she never needed it? And when the truth is revealed, whose heart will break first, his or hers? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Look at her. Richard gestured at Eleanor, who stood frozen in the doorway, her heart hammering in her chest. What kind of Caldwell is this? Where are my genes in that face? Eleanor clutched the birthday gift she'd made for him, a hand-drawn portrait she'd spent weeks perfecting. At 8 years old, she'd poured her whole heart into it, hoping to make her daddy smile. Richard's cold eyes swept over her from head to toe. Margaret, I told you we should have considered adoption. At least then we could have chosen someone who looks the part. Margaret stepped between them. Richard, that's enough. No, it's not nearly enough. He snatched the drawing from Eleanor's trembling hands and barely glanced at it before tossing it aside. This is what she does with her time? Drawing pictures when she should be working on herself? Eleanor's chin quivered. Daddy, don't call me that. His voice cut like glass. Not until you become someone I can proudly introduce as my daughter. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. I'm trying. Richard straightened his expensive tie, his expression hardening. Trying isn't good enough. Look at you, plain face, ordinary in every way. You'll never be beautiful enough to be my daughter, Eleanor. Never. The words crashed into her like physical blows. Eleanor took a step back, her small shoulders collapsing inward. Richard checked his watch. I have a meeting. People who matter are waiting. He grabbed his briefcase and strode past Eleanor without another glance, leaving behind the scent of his cologne and the heaviness of his rejection. The front door slammed. Eleanor stood motionless, tears streaming down her cheeks. Margaret rushed to her daughter, kneeling to wrap her arms around Eleanor's shaking frame. Oh, my sweet girl, don't listen to him. Don't you ever listen. Eleanor buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Why doesn't Daddy love me? Margaret pulled back just enough to cup Eleanor's face in her hands. Your father is a foolish man who can't see true beauty. And you, my darling, are beautiful in all the ways that truly matter. Eleanor's eyes, swollen with tears, looked up at her mother. But my face is perfect exactly as it island. Margaret wiped away Eleanor's tears with gentle thumbs. God created you with such care, such love. Your father's broken eyes can't see what's right in front of him. Margaret gathered the discarded drawing from the floor, smoothing its crumpled edges. This is beautiful, Eleanor. Your talent shines through every line. But the compliment couldn't reach the wounded place in Eleanor's heart. Her father's words had already taken root, spreading poison through her young soul. Later that night, tucked into bed with her favorite stuffed rabbit, Eleanor stared at the ceiling. The house had gone quiet, but then her parents' voices drifted through the walls. How could you say such things to your own child? Her mother's voice, normally so gentle, had an edge Eleanor rarely heard. I'm doing her a favor. Her father's response was cold, unmoved. The world isn't kind to plain girls. Better she learns now than later. She's 8 years old, Richard. 8. And you're destroying her spirit. If her spirit is that fragile, she'll never survive anyway. Eleanor pulled her pillow over her ears, but couldn't block out the cruel words. Fresh tears soaked into her pillowcase as she clutched her rabbit tighter. You don't deserve her, she heard her mother say. Maybe neither of us do, came her father's reply. Eleanor curled into a tight ball beneath her blankets, wondering what she had done wrong, why she couldn't be the daughter her father wanted. She cried until exhaustion finally pulled her into a fitful sleep, her father's verdict never beautiful enough echoing in her dreams. The next day at school, Eleanor sat alone at her desk, pushing crayons across a blank page. The teacher had asked them to draw their favorite memory, but all Eleanor could think about was her father's face when he'd thrown away her drawing. Whatcha making, Eleanor? Brittany leaned over, her blonde pigtails swinging. Another ugly picture? Eleanor's hand froze mid-stroke. It's not ugly. Let me see. Brittany snatched the paper away, holding it up for the other kids to see. Look how weird the colors are. It's all wrong. Give it back, Eleanor whispered, reaching for her drawing. Tommy, a freckle-faced boy from the desk behind, laughed. My dad says the Caldwells are supposed to be the prettiest family in town. Guess they made a mistake with you. The words stung like a fresh cut over yesterday's wound. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn as several classmates giggled. Maybe she's adopted, Brittany suggested, dropping the drawing onto Eleanor's desk. That's what my mom says. No way she's a real Caldwell. I am too, Eleanor insisted, her voice trembling. Then why doesn't your dad ever come to school stuff? Tommy asked. My dad says your dad's embarrassed because you don't look like him. Eleanor stared down at her desk, wishing she could disappear. The teacher called the class to attention, but the damage was done. During recess, she hid in the library corner, flipping through picture books about faraway places where nobody knew her name. The walk home felt longer than usual. Eleanor kicked at loose stones on the sidewalk, dragging her feet. When she finally reached her house, she paused at the front door, gathering courage to face whatever waited inside. Eleanor? Margaret called from the kitchen. Is that you, sweetheart? The warm smell of chocolate chip cookies filled the air. Eleanor dropped her backpack by the door and followed the scent, finding her mother at the counter, wearing the apron Eleanor had painted for Mother's Day. There's my girl. Margaret smiled, but her expression shifted when she saw Eleanor's face. What happened, darling? Eleanor climbed onto a kitchen stool. The kids at school said I'm not a real Caldwell. Margaret set down her spatula and came around the counter. Oh, Eleanor. Tommy said Daddy's embarrassed of me. Eleanor's voice cracked. And Brittany said my drawing was ugly, just like... She couldn't finish the sentence. Just like what your father said. Margaret completed the thought, pulling Eleanor into her arms. Listen to me. Those children are only repeating what they've heard from their parents, who know nothing about what makes a person truly beautiful. Eleanor buried her face against her mother's shoulder. But why can't I be pretty like the other girls? You are beautiful in your own perfect way. Margaret stroked Eleanor's hair. And someday, the whole world will see what I already know. That evening, Margaret ran a bubble bath and helped Eleanor wash her hair. They read stories together on the couch, and for a little while, Eleanor forgot about school and her father and all the things that made her feel small. At bedtime, Margaret tucked the blankets around Eleanor and kissed her forehead. Do you know what I see when I look at you? Eleanor shook her head. I see a light so bright it can't be hidden forever. Margaret's voice was soft but certain. One day, Eleanor, you will shine in your own special way, and everyone, even your father, will have to shield their eyes from your brilliance. Eleanor closed her eyes, holding on to her mother's words like a promise, like a secret map to a future where she might finally be enough. Eleanor, could you help at Register 3? Mrs. Jenkins called from across Willowbrook department store. Eleanor nodded, smoothing down her employee vest. At 19, she'd been working at the store for almost a year, mostly organizing displays and restocking shelves. Customer interaction still made her nervous. Of course, she answered, making her way to the vacant register. A woman with an armful of scarves approached. Finally, I've been waiting forever. Eleanor scanned each item carefully. I'm sorry for the wait. Well, at least you're efficient. The woman tapped her credit card impatiently against the counter. Eleanor kept her head down, focusing on folding each scarf precisely before placing it in the shopping bag. Her movements were measured, careful, a dance of hands she'd perfected to avoid drawing attention to herself. You have remarkable posture, the woman commented suddenly, her tone softening. Most girls your age slouch terribly, but you carry yourself like a dancer. Eleanor looked up, startled. Oh, thank you. She handed over the receipt, already retreating behind her practiced smile. You should model, you know. You have that certain something, a presence. Eleanor shook her head. No, I'm not. I don't... She fumbled for words. Well, think about it. The woman collected her bags. Not everyone needs to look like a cookie-cutter magazine cover. The interesting ones never do. After the woman left, Eleanor exhaled, dismissing the compliment as nothing more than politeness. Later that evening, Eleanor set the table while Margaret prepared dinner. The small house they'd moved to after Richard left them felt cozier than the mansion they'd once lived in, warmer somehow, despite being a fraction of the size. Someone told me I should model today, Eleanor mentioned, almost laughing at the absurdity. Margaret looked up from the pot she was stirring. Really? That's wonderful. Mom, be serious. Eleanor arranged the silverware with precision. People who look like me don't model. And what exactly do you look like? Margaret challenged gently. Eleanor shrugged. You know, ordinary, plain. I see nothing ordinary about you. Margaret set 2 bowls of stew on the table. Speaking of which, there's something I wanted to mention. The community center is hosting a charity fashion show next weekend. Local businesses are participating. That's nice. Eleanor sat down, reaching for the bread basket. I thought we might go, Margaret suggested. Mrs. Harmon from church is organizing it. Eleanor stirred her stew, avoiding her mother's eyes. I don't know, Mom. Fashion shows are about beautiful people wearing beautiful clothes. I'd feel out of place. It's for charity, Eleanor. To raise money for the children's hospital. Margaret reached across the table, covering Eleanor's hand with her own. Besides, you love clothes. You're always sketching designs in that notebook of yours. That's different. That's private. Eleanor pulled her hand away. I'd rather just donate money directly. Margaret was quiet for a moment. The woman today wasn't wrong, you know. You do have something special, a grace that can't be taught. Mom, just come with me, Margaret persisted. We'll sit in the back. I promise no one will even notice us. Eleanor looked at her mother's hopeful expression. After all these years, Margaret had never stopped trying to coax her out of her shell, never stopped believing in possibilities that Eleanor couldn't see. Fine, Eleanor sighed, but I'm not dressing up, and we're leaving right after it ends. Margaret smiled, triumph sparkling in her eyes. That's all I ask. Eleanor returned to her stew, unaware that her reluctant agreement would set in motion events that would change everything. The community center buzzed with activity as volunteers transformed the modest space into a makeshift runway. Clothing racks lined the walls, and women darted about with safety pins and measuring tape. Eleanor hung back near the entrance, clutching her mother's arm. It's packed in here. Isn't it wonderful? Margaret beamed. The whole town's come together. Mrs. Harmon spotted them and hurried over, distress evident on her face. Margaret, thank goodness you're here. We have an emergency. What's happened? Margaret asked. Cindy Peterson's daughter came down with the flu. She was modeling the Blakely Boutique collection, and now we're short a model. She wrung her hands. The show starts in an hour. Before Eleanor could react, Margaret's hand settled on her shoulder. What about Eleanor? She's about Cindy's daughter's size. Eleanor's eyes widened. Mom, no, please consider it, dear, Mrs. Harmon pleaded. It's just walking across the stage in a few outfits, nothing fancy. Eleanor shook her head. I can't. I don't know how to model. There's nothing to know, Margaret said softly. Just walk like yourself. Remember what that customer said about your posture? Eleanor looked around the room, at the excitement in her mother's eyes, at Mrs. Harmon's desperate expression. A lifetime of hiding in shadows warred with a tiny voice inside that whispered, What if? It's for the children's hospital, Margaret reminded her. Eleanor took a deep breath. Okay, but only because you're desperate. Backstage was chaos. Eleanor stood frozen as volunteers dressed her in a simple blue sundress. She peeked through the curtains at the crowd filling the chairs. I can't do this, she whispered. An older woman adjusting another model's collar overheard. Honey, everyone's nervous their first time. Just remember, chin up, shoulders back, and walk like you've got somewhere important to be. The music started. One by one, models stepped onto the runway. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as her turn approached. You're next, someone whispered, giving her a gentle push. Eleanor stepped onto the runway, blinded momentarily by the lights. She focused on the far wall, willing her legs not to tremble. Just walk naturally, she told herself. It'll be over soon. Something strange happened as she moved forward. The nervous flutter in her stomach settled. Her steps found a rhythm that felt oddly familiar, as if her body remembered something her mind had forgotten. She reached the end of the runway and paused, just for a moment, before turning. A murmur rippled through the audience. Eleanor caught fragments of whispers. Who is she? Look at how she moves. When she returned backstage, hands quickly helped her change into the next outfit. 3 more walks, 3 more outfits. With each one, Eleanor felt something unfurling inside her, a quiet confidence she'd never known. After the final walk, the applause was thunderous. Mrs. Harmon hugged her backstage. Eleanor, you were magnificent. A natural. Eleanor changed back into her own clothes, still dazed by the experience. She found Margaret waiting in the hallway, eyes shining with unshed tears. I knew it, Margaret whispered. I always knew. A dignified older woman approached them, her silver hair swept into an elegant bun. Excuse me, she said, extending her hand to Eleanor. I'm Mrs. Delaney. Hello, Eleanor replied, shaking her hand. I used to scout for Magnolia Modeling Agency in New York. Mrs. Delaney explained. I'm retired now, but I know talent when I see it. Young lady, you have a remarkable presence on the runway, a natural grace that can't be taught. Eleanor blushed. Thank you, but I was just walking. Mrs. Delaney smiled. That's exactly what makes it special. You weren't trying to be anyone else. She handed Eleanor a business card. I have some connections still. If you're interested, I'd like to help you explore this further. As Mrs. Delaney walked away, Eleanor stared at the card in her hand, feeling as though she'd stepped into someone else's life. Eleanor stared at the card for 3 days. Each morning she'd take it from her dresser drawer, run her thumb over the embossed lettering Vivian Delaney, fashion consultant, then tuck it away again. The charity show felt like a dream now, something that had happened to someone else. Are you going to call her? Margaret asked over breakfast on Thursday morning, nodding toward Eleanor's pocket where the card now resided. I don't know. Eleanor pushed her cereal around the bowl. It seemed silly. Me? Modeling? Margaret reached across the table and covered Eleanor's hand with her own. Why is that silly? Eleanor didn't answer. They both knew why. Years of her father's words echoed in her head. Not pretty enough. Not special enough. Not enough. The phone rang, interrupting their silence. Margaret answered. Then her eyebrows shot up. Yes, she's right here. She held out the receiver to Eleanor. It's Mrs. Delaney. Eleanor's heart skipped. She took the phone, her palm suddenly damp. Hello? Eleanor, dear. I was beginning to think you'd lost my card. Mrs. Delaney's voice was warm but direct. I've been thinking about you since the show. You have? Indeed. I spoke with James Wilson yesterday. He's a photographer friend who does work for several magazines. He's in town this weekend and agreed to take some test shots for your portfolio. Eleanor nearly dropped the phone. My portfolio? Every model needs one, dear. Nothing fancy to start. Just a few simple shots to show agencies what you've got. Mrs. Delaney, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not a model. A chuckle came through the line. Not yet, perhaps, but you could be. Her tone softened. Eleanor, I've been in this business 40 years. I've seen girls with perfect features who couldn't hold a camera's attention for 2 seconds, and I've seen unconventional beauties who light up every frame. You have something special, a presence, a grace. Eleanor glanced at her mother, who was pretending not to listen while washing dishes. I don't know the first thing about posing or... That's the point. You don't need to. The best models don't pose, they exist naturally in front of the camera. Mrs. Delaney paused. Look, the shoot is Saturday morning at Riverside Park. No pressure, no contracts, just some photos to see what happens. Bring your mother if you'd like. The silence stretched as Eleanor's mind raced. This wasn't real. Things like this didn't happen to plain Eleanor Caldwell from a small town. What do I have to lose? She finally whispered. Nothing at all, dear, but perhaps something to gain. After hanging up, Eleanor stood frozen by the phone. Margaret dried her hands on a dish towel, trying to contain her smile. Well, she wants me to do a photo shoot on Saturday. The words felt foreign in Eleanor's mouth. For a portfolio. Margaret clasped her hands together. Oh, Ellie, it's probably nothing. Eleanor tucked her hair behind her ear. Just a favor she's doing. Or maybe it's an opportunity. Margaret touched her daughter's cheek. One you deserve. That night, Eleanor stood before her mirror longer than usual. She didn't see a model looking back, just herself, with the same face that had disappointed her father. But for the first time, she wondered if there might be something else there, something she couldn't see, but others could. She took out the card again and ran her finger across Mrs. Delaney's name. Saturday. A few photos. What does she have to lose? Okay, she whispered to her reflection. Let's try. Saturday morning dawned with perfect golden light filtering through the trees at Riverside Park. Eleanor arrived with Margaret, both of them 15 minutes early, both equally nervous. What if I freeze up? Eleanor twisted her hands together. Then you'll unfreeze, Margaret said simply, smoothing a wrinkle from Eleanor's simple white blouse. Mrs. Delaney waved from under an oak tree, standing beside a young man unpacking camera equipment. He looked up as they approached, and Eleanor noticed kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Eleanor, Margaret, meet Daniel Hayes. Best eye in the business for finding the truth in a subject. Daniel stepped forward with an easy smile. Mrs. Delaney exaggerates. I just point the camera at interesting people and press a button. He extended his hand to Eleanor. It's good to meet you. His handshake was warm and firm. Nothing like the dismissive touches she'd grown accustomed to from men who found her forgettable. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, Eleanor admitted. Daniel laughed. Perfect. The people who think they know what they're doing are the hardest to photograph. He gestured toward a bench. Let's just talk for a bit while I adjust my equipment. As Daniel fiddled with lenses and light meters, he asked Eleanor questions about books she loved, places she'd visited, dreams she kept quiet. Not once did he mention her appearance or how she should pose. Okay, why don't you just walk over there by that willow tree? He suggested finally. Don't look at me. Just look at whatever catches your eye. Eleanor did as he asked, feeling awkward at first. But something about Daniel's calm presence made her shoulders relax. He moved around her, camera clicking softly, never barking orders like she'd imagined photographers would. You're doing great, he called out. Now tell me about that book you mentioned, the one with the girl who goes through the wardrobe. As Eleanor described her favorite childhood story, she forgot about the camera. Daniel captured her mid-sentence, eyes bright with enthusiasm. That's it, he murmured. That's exactly what I'm looking for. When Eleanor stumbled over a root, nearly falling, she covered her face in embarrassment. "Don't stop," Daniel encouraged. "Everyone falls. The interesting people are those who catch themselves with grace." The morning passed in a blur. Daniel photographed Eleanor in different spots around the park, seated under trees, walking along pathways, even laughing with her mother. "Last few shots," he announced eventually. "Eleanor, look directly at the camera now." She hesitated. This was the moment of truth, facing the lens straight on. "I can't," she whispered. Daniel lowered his camera and stepped closer. "Do you know what I see through this lens? Someone remarkable. Not because you're trying to be someone else, but because you're completely yourself." Eleanor took a deep breath and lifted her eyes to the camera. For once, she didn't hide. An hour later, Daniel handed her a small envelope. "Quick prints. The full set will be ready next week." With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened the packet. The photos inside weren't of some polished, artificial beauty. They were of her, but a version she'd never recognized before. A young woman with expressive eyes that held both vulnerability and strength. A natural elegance in the tilt of her head, the curve of her neck. "Is this really me?" she whispered, showing them to Margaret, whose eyes had filled with tears. "It's always been you," her mother answered. "You just couldn't see it." Eleanor clutched the photos to her chest, a physical record of something she'd never believed existed, her own quiet radiance. The weeks that followed transformed Eleanor's life in ways she never expected. After Mrs. Delaney sent her portfolio to several agencies, the calls began hesitant at first, then increasingly frequent. "We're looking for something different," one agent told her after a meeting in the city. "You have an unusual look." Eleanor knew unusual was code for not conventionally beautiful, but she nodded and thanked them anyway. At her first real photo shoot for a local department store catalog, Eleanor stood frozen while makeup artists and stylists circled her like curious birds. "Not much to work with," muttered one makeup artist to another. "Those eyebrows are so heavy." "And that nose," whispered the other. Eleanor's cheeks burned. The words stung like tiny paper cuts, too small to bandage but impossible to ignore. Later, as she posed awkwardly before the lights, the photographer sighed loudly. "Can you try to look less ordinary?" "I don't know how," Eleanor admitted. "Just think of something that makes you feel special." A wardrobe assistant suggested kindly. Eleanor closed her eyes and thought of her mother's unwavering belief in her. When she opened them again, something had shifted. The camera clicked rapidly. "That's it," the photographer said, surprised. "Whatever you just did, keep doing it." Each job brought similar experiences, cutting remarks followed by unexpected moments of grace. A famous designer examined her face like a specimen before declaring, "She has honesty." "I like that." A makeup artist spent extra time showing Eleanor how to highlight her best features. "You have amazing bone structure. Anyone can be pretty, but you have character." At home, Margaret tracked each small victory in a scrapbook, Eleanor's first catalog page, a local magazine spread, a tiny mention in a fashion blog. "Look at you," Margaret marveled one evening, turning pages of the growing collection. "You're blooming." Eleanor smiled, tracing a finger over a particularly good photo. "It still doesn't feel real." "Do you think you'll tell your father?" Margaret asked gently. Eleanor shook her head. "He wouldn't care, and I'm not ready for him to judge this too." The following Tuesday, Eleanor waited at a downtown cafe for a meeting with a promising new client. She flipped through a magazine on the table, and suddenly her hand froze. There, on a glossy full-page spread titled "Midwest Business Leaders and Their Families," stood Richard Caldwell. He looked older but still handsome in his tailored suit, his arm around a slender blonde woman with perfect features. Between them stood a little girl of about 7, with golden curls and a pageant smile. The caption read, "Richard Caldwell, with wife Vivian and daughter Penelope, at the Children's Hospital Gala." Eleanor stared at the girl's flawless face, the obvious pride in Richard's expression as he gazed down at her. It was the look Eleanor had spent her childhood hoping to earn, just once. "Penelope," she whispered, tracing the child's face. The perfect little daughter. A cold ache spread through her chest. All her recent success felt suddenly hollow. No matter how many cameras captured her image, she would never be the daughter her father wanted. She would always be the disappointment he had rejected. Eleanor closed the magazine and pushed it away, blinking back tears before they could ruin her makeup for the meeting. She had come too far to let this break her. But the wound that had never fully healed now throbbed with fresh pain. Eleanor paced the small dressing room, her reflection multiplied by mirrors on every wall. The national modeling competition had seemed like a dream opportunity, When Mrs. Delaney suggested it until now, standing backstage with dozens of perfect-looking competitors, it felt more like a nightmare. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor," Daniel said, adjusting his camera strap. He'd volunteered to photograph her portfolio for the competition and had become her unexpected ally in the cutthroat industry. "I can't do this." Eleanor stopped pacing and hugged herself. "Everyone out there looks like they belong on magazine covers. I look like someone real." Daniel approached her, his voice gentle but firm. "That's your strength, Eleanor. You're not cookie cutter. You're authentic." Eleanor smoothed her simple blue dress, chosen to bring out her eyes. "What if I freeze up? What if they laugh? Then we'll laugh back and go get ice cream." He squeezed her shoulder. "But that's not going to happen. You've been preparing for weeks." The stage manager poked her head in. "Caldwell, you're up in 5. Daniel pulled a small, worn book from his bag. "Here, what's this?" Eleanor opened it to find photographs her first shoots with him. Candid moments of her laughing, looking thoughtful, caught in natural light. "Remember who you are," Daniel said. "Not who anyone else thinks you should be." Eleanor nodded, throat tight with emotion. She handed the book back and squared her shoulders. "I'll be right in the audience," Daniel promised. "Just look for me if you get nervous." The walk to the stage entrance felt eternal. Eleanor took deep breaths, repeating her mother's words in her head. "You shine in your own way." The competition assistant checked her name off a clipboard. "The judges will ask you to walk, then pose, then answer a few questions. Standard procedure." Eleanor nodded, peering through the curtain at the brightly lit runway. 5 judges sat at a long table, scribbling notes as a tall redhead strutted confidently before them. That's when she saw him. Second from the left, silver hair immaculately styled, the same critical eyes she'd spent childhood trying to please. Richard Caldwell, founder of Caldwell Enterprises, and apparently a guest judge for the competition's business sponsorship division. Eleanor stumbled back from the curtain, blood rushing in her ears. "Miss, you okay?" The assistant frowned. "My father," Eleanor whispered. "He's one of the judges." The assistant checked her clipboard again. "Richard Caldwell? Oh yes, major sponsor. You know him?" Eleanor couldn't find words. All her progress, all her carefully built confidence, threatened to collapse. She fumbled for her phone, nearly calling her mother before stopping herself. Margaret would tell her to withdraw, to protect herself from Richard's inevitable criticism. But running away would only prove him right. "Miss Caldwell, it's time." Eleanor stepped onto the runway, lights blinding her momentarily. She found Daniel in the audience, his encouraging nod steadying her. Then she turned toward the judges' table. One by one, she met their gazes, 4 strangers. And then, finally, Richard. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then recognition dawned, followed by something cold and dismissive. He knew exactly who she was. Eleanor's feet felt cemented to the floor. 10 years of pain and rejection crystallized into this moment facing the man who had deemed her unworthy of love simply because of how she looked. The head judge cleared his throat. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Caldwell." Eleanor took a deep breath. This wasn't just an audition anymore. This was her reckoning. Eleanor straightened her spine and took that first step forward. The runway stretched before her like a narrow bridge over troubled waters, but with each measured stride, she found her rhythm. Years of being overlooked had taught her to move quietly through the world, and now that same gentle grace transformed into something powerful. She reached the end of the runway, paused, and turned exactly as Daniel had practiced with her. The lights caught the subtle highlights in her hair, casting a warm glow around her face. 4 of the 5 judges leaned forward with interest, their pens scribbling across notepads. Only Richard remained unmoved, his expression carved from stone. His eyes followed her, but there was no warmth in them, only calculation, as if he were assessing a business proposition rather than watching his daughter. "Tell us why you're here today," called the head judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. Eleanor's gaze flickered to Richard before settling on the woman. "I'm here because I believe beauty isn't just what we see on the surface. It's how we carry ourselves, how we treat others." "Very inspiring," interrupted the judge beside Richard, checking his watch. "But this is a modeling competition, not a philosophy class." A few nervous titters rippled through the audience. Eleanor felt her confidence waver. "Actually," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "that's exactly why modeling matters. We show people more than clothes, we show them possibilities." She completed another turn, feeling the dress swirl gracefully around her ankles. "Everyone deserves to see themselves represented with dignity." The head judge smiled. Richard shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. "Thank you, Miss Caldwell," said the head judge. "You may exit stage right." Eleanor walked off, legs trembling now that the moment had passed. She barely made it to the wings before the emotions caught up with her. Daniel was waiting, camera lowered. "You were magnificent," he whispered, guiding her back toward the dressing rooms. "He didn't even blink," Eleanor said, voice barely audible. "Like I was nothing to him." "Then he's blind," Daniel replied firmly. "The others saw you." Back in the dressing room, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. "How did it go, sweetheart?" The simple question unleashed everything she'd been holding back. Eleanor pressed her fingers against her lips, trying to contain the sob that threatened to escape. A soft knock at the door startled her. Margaret stood there, a vision of maternal concern in her faded blue cardigan. "Mom, how did you—" "Daniel called me." Margaret crossed the small room and gathered Eleanor into her arms. "I couldn't let you face this alone." Eleanor collapsed into her mother's embrace. "Dad was there, one of the judges." Her voice cracked. "He looked right through me." Margaret stroked her daughter's hair. "His blindness has always been his loss, never your failing." They sat together as other contestants bustled past the door, Margaret holding Eleanor's hand just as she had when Eleanor was small. "Maybe this was a mistake," Eleanor whispered. "No." Margaret's voice was surprisingly firm. "You belong here because you chose to be here. Not because of him, but despite him." The stage manager appeared at the door. "Results are posting in 5 minutes." Eleanor and Margaret followed the crowd to the main hall where a digital board displayed the names advancing to the next round. Eleanor couldn't bear to look, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. "Eleanor," Margaret breathed, squeezing her hand. "Look, there on the screen, among the 20 names continuing to the next round. Eleanor Caldwell." "You did it," Margaret whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "You're moving forward." Eleanor stared at her name, glowing on the screen. Moving forward away from the past, away from rejection, into something entirely her own. The hotel lobby buzzed with excitement as contestants gathered to receive their next assignments. Eleanor hung back, watching the others with quiet curiosity. These women moved with practiced confidence, something she was still learning to do off the runway. First time at nationals? A tall woman with cropped hair and warm brown eyes approached, offering Eleanor a bottle of water. "Is it that obvious?" Eleanor asked, accepting the drink gratefully. "I'm Zara." She extended her hand. Third competition. Still nervous every time. Their conversation flowed easily as they compared stories. Zara had worked retail for years before a customer suggested modeling. 2 other contestants joined them, May, whose laughter came as easily as breathing, and Jasmine, who'd been modeling since childhood but lacked the pretension Eleanor expected. "The veterans table is over there." Zara pointed toward a cluster of women shooting calculating glances their way. "They're not exactly welcoming to newcomers. Especially not to you," May added, lowering her voice. "Caroline the blonde has been telling everyone you don't belong here." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Why would she care about me?" "Because the judges couldn't stop talking about your walk," Jasmine said. "Authentic, they called it. That's what scares them." Throughout the week, Eleanor found strength in these new friendships. They practiced together, shared meals, and exchanged industry tips. Each morning, Daniel met them at various locations around the city for portfolio shoots. He worked magic with his camera, directing the group with gentle encouragement. "Less pose, more you," he'd say, particularly to Eleanor. "The camera loves when you forget it's there." But not everyone proved supportive. Eleanor returned to her room one evening to find her competition makeup mysteriously missing. The morning of their beach shoot, someone had poured coffee on her white sundress. Small sabotages that carried a clear message. "You don't belong." "It's Caroline," Zara confirmed after helping Eleanor salvage the dress. She's scared. "Of me? That's ridiculous. Is it? You're different. Judges notice different." On the 4th day, Eleanor discovered her portfolio photos scattered across the hotel hallway, footprints marring several prints. She gathered them silently, fighting back tears as she smoothed each crumpled image. "Don't let them see you crack," Daniel said, finding her kneeling on the carpet. He helped collect the remaining photos. "This means you're doing something right." That afternoon, Daniel suggested they break from the group. "Just you today," he said, leading her to a quiet courtyard filled with dappled sunlight. No poses, no pressure. Eleanor couldn't help feeling self-conscious at first. "What should I do?" "Just be," he answered, adjusting his lens. "Tell me about your mom, about those books you're always carrying." As she spoke about Margaret's unwavering support and her love of classic literature, Daniel captured frame after frame. The camera's click faded into background noise as Eleanor relaxed into genuine conversation. Later, reviewing the day's shots in Daniel's makeshift studio, Eleanor gasped. The woman in these photos looked nothing like the uncertain girl who'd stepped onto that first runway. This woman radiated quiet confidence. In one particular image, she was mid-laugh, eyes crinkled with genuine joy, completely unaware of the camera. "That's you?" Daniel said softly, watching her reaction. Not posing, not trying, just being. Eleanor touched the photo gently. "I look beautiful," Daniel finished. "But more importantly, you look like yourself." For the first time since the competition began, Eleanor felt a spark of pure joy unfurl in her chest. Not because someone else validated her beauty, but because she finally recognized it herself. The evening reception glittered with influenced judges, sponsors, and industry icons mingled with contestants in the hotel's grand ballroom. Eleanor entered cautiously, wearing a simple black dress that Daniel had assured her was perfect. She spotted Zara across the room and started toward her when the crowd shifted. Richard Caldwell stood near the center, commanding attention as naturally as breathing. Eleanor froze. Beside him stood a petite woman draped in diamonds, his second wife, Vivian, and between them, a teenage girl with perfect features that mirrored Richard's aristocratic bone structure. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice carried effortlessly across the room. "While I'm honored to serve as judge for this prestigious competition, tonight I'd like to introduce someone special." Eleanor pressed herself against a column, heart hammering. She hadn't seen him this close in years. "My daughter, Sophia." Richard beamed, placing his hand on the girl's shoulder. "Just 15 and already receiving modeling offers. The perfect blend of her mother's grace and my family's distinguished features." Sophia offered a practiced smile as applause rippled through the room. Richard continued, "Beauty runs in our bloodline, you see. Sophia is my only child, my pride and joy." The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. My only child. She existed so little to him that he could erase her completely, even while standing in the same room. "That's her, isn't it?" Caroline's voice carried from nearby. "The new contestant. She's his daughter too, the one he doesn't acknowledge." "I heard he disowned her because she wasn't pretty enough," another voice added. "How awkward. Imagine competing while your father judges and pretends you don't exist." Eleanor's cheeks burned. The room suddenly felt airless. Richard's gaze swept past her without a flicker of recognition, though she caught Sophia studying her with curious eyes. "Eleanor." Daniel appeared at her side, steadying her with a gentle touch to her elbow. "You don't have to stay." She almost fled. Almost. Then she thought of Margaret's unwavering belief in her, of the photos that showed her genuine smile, of how far she had already come. "Actually," Eleanor straightened her shoulders, "I think I'll get some punch." She moved through the crowd with deliberate calm, aware of eyes tracking her progress. At the refreshment table, she found herself beside Sophia, who looked up with startled recognition. "You're Eleanor," the girl whispered. "I've seen your photos in Father's old albums. Mother doesn't know he kept them." Before Eleanor could respond, Richard appeared, his expression hardening as he registered her presence. "Sophia, your mother's looking for you." His voice carried no warmth as he placed himself between them. To Eleanor, he said nothing at all, simply turned away, as if she were invisible. The silence hurt worse than any cruel words could have. Eleanor stood perfectly still, punch glass in hand, as father and half-sister disappeared into the crowd. "Well, that was illuminating," Caroline drawled, sidling up beside her. "Daddy issues explain so much about your unusual approach to modeling." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "Thank you, Caroline." "For what?" The woman looked genuinely confused. "For showing me exactly the kind of model I don't want to be." Eleanor placed her untouched glass down and walked out of the ballroom, head high. In the quiet of the elevator, she finally allowed herself a deep, shaking breath. The pain was familiar, the sharp ache of rejection, the hollow echo of erasure. But something new burned alongside it, determination, fierce and clear. She would not break. She would not withdraw. For the first time in her life, Eleanor understood that proving her father wrong wasn't about gaining his approval, it was about claiming her own worth. A week after the dinner, Eleanor stood backstage at the Metropolitan Fashion Hall, trembling as a makeup artist made final touches. The semifinals, a live runway show, would determine who advanced to the final round. 5 minutes, ladies," the stage manager bustled through. Eleanor clutched the dressing table. How had she gotten here? A plain girl from a small town now standing among the industry's rising stars. "You look perfect," Daniel said, appearing with his camera. He'd been hired as one of the event photographers, a coincidence that felt like providence. "Remember what we talked about?" Eleanor nodded. "Walk like I belong there." "Because you do." His smile steadied her nerves. "Your mother's in the third row. I saved her a spot." The announcement came for the first group. Eleanor joined the line, breathing deeply as the first contestants disappeared through the curtain. The lights dimmed. Music pulsed. Her turn approached. Next up, Eleanor Caldwell. She stepped onto the runway into blinding light. For a terrifying moment, her legs threatened to lock. Then she remembered Margaret's words from that morning. Just be the Eleanor I've always seen. Something shifted inside her. Instead of mimicking the other model's struts, Eleanor moved with a natural grace that came from somewhere deeper than practiced poses. Her steps flowed with quiet confidence. Her face, rather than wearing the blank expression models often adopted, held a gentle warmth that caught the audience by surprise. She reached the end of the runway and paused. The judges' table stretched below her 5 industry titans, including Richard. Eleanor looked directly at him, not with challenge or hurt, but with simple acknowledgement of her own existence. His expression flickered surprise, discomfort, something unreadable before he glanced down at his notes. The audience's response started as a murmur before swelling into enthusiastic applause. Eleanor turned with fluid ease and continued her walk back, shoulders straight, eyes forward. "That was incredible," Zara whispered as Eleanor returned backstage. "You looked like you were floating out there." Eleanor blinked. "I did? You didn't look like you were trying to be anyone else," Daniel said, appearing with his camera. "That's what made it special." The rest of the show passed in a blur. When the judges announced the finalists, Eleanor heard her name called third. Margaret rushed backstage afterward, enveloping her in a fierce hug. "I knew it," she whispered. "I always knew it." As the crowd thinned, Eleanor gathered her things. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Meet me by the south entrance. Something you need to see." She found him waiting with a large manila envelope. This came to the press table during the show. His eyes sparkled with excitement. "Open it." Inside was a glossy magazine, Modern Beauty, its pages still smelling of fresh ink. Eleanor gasped. Her own face looked back at her from the cover, a photo Daniel had taken during one of their early sessions. She looked natural, genuine, beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with perfection. "They rushed the print," Daniel explained. "The editor was in the audience today, said they needed to be first to feature the model who's changing beauty standards." Eleanor traced her fingers over the cover, hardly believing it was real. In the photo, she wasn't posing or pretending. She was simply herself. "Your father saw it," Daniel added quietly. "I watched him staring at that cover for a full minute." Eleanor looked up. "It doesn't matter if he saw it," she said softly. "For the first time, I see it." Eleanor's world transformed in the weeks following the magazine cover. Her phone rang constantly with new opportunities, local commercials, department store catalogs, and interviews with fashion bloggers. What started as a trickle became a steady stream of work. "I still can't believe it," she told Daniel over coffee at their favorite cafe. They'd developed a ritual of meeting here after shoots, his camera always close at hand. "I can." He captured her mid-laugh, the camera clicking softly. "You're changing how people see beauty." It wasn't just industry professionals noticing her. Young women stopped Eleanor on the street, sometimes with tears in their eyes. "Your freckles made me stop covering mine," one college student confessed while Eleanor signed her magazine. "My boyfriend says they're my best feature now." Social media accounts dedicated to her style appeared. Fan pages celebrated her realness in an industry built on illusion. Fashion forums debated whether her success signaled a shift in beauty standards. "They're calling you the authentic angel," Margaret announced one evening, scrolling through her phone with growing amazement. Eleanor smiled. "I'm just being myself. That's exactly why they love you." 3 photo shoots later, a cosmetics brand known for its inclusive campaigns signed her as their newest face. The billboards went up across 5 major cities, Eleanor's gentle smile beaming down on busy streets, accompanied by a single word: real. Through it all, Daniel remained her constant. He was there with encouragement before difficult shoots and celebration after victories. Their professional relationship evolved into something deeper, marked by late-night conversations and shared dreams. "I used to hide in my viewfinder," Daniel admitted one evening as they walked through the park after a particularly exhausting day. Fall leaves crunched beneath their feet. "Taking photos of beautiful things because I didn't feel I belonged in the picture." Eleanor stopped walking. "That's exactly how I felt my whole life." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe that's why we found each other." Their first kiss happened naturally, a quiet moment between takes during a sunrise shoot at the harbor. No cameras captured it, some moments weren't meant for sharing. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Eleanor's agent called with news that left her speechless. She immediately drove to Margaret's house, bursting through the door without knocking. "Mom," her voice echoed through the small home. "Mom, where are you?" Margaret emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. What's happened? Is everything all right? Eleanor's eyes shone. National Fashion Week wants me to walk in their televised runway show, the biggest event of the year. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. Oh, Eleanor. They said my refreshing presence is exactly what the show needs. Eleanor paced the kitchen, too excited to stand still. It's being broadcast live across the country. Your father might see, Margaret said softly. Eleanor paused. I know, but this isn't about him anymore. Her voice steadied. This is about all the girls who feel like they're not enough. And maybe, just maybe, some father will see it and tell his daughter she's beautiful, exactly as she island. Margaret pulled her daughter close. When is it? 3 weeks from Saturday. Eleanor's heart raced with equal parts terror and excitement. The biggest stage I've ever walked. Then we better get ready, Margaret said, her eyes reflecting Eleanor's own determination. The world is waiting to see you shine. The backstage area of National Fashion Week hummed with frantic energy. Makeup artists darted between models, stylists made last-minute adjustments, and producers barked orders through headsets. Eleanor stood still as a final touch of powder was brushed across her cheekbones. 5 minutes, everyone, the stage manager called. Daniel had managed to slip backstage for a moment. He found Eleanor in the chaos and squeezed her hand. Your mother's in the front row, right where we planned. He lowered his voice. And your father is 3 seats down from her. Eleanor took a deep breath. Is he with them? His other family? Just him. Business suit. Looks uncomfortable. Daniel's eyes softened. But you don't need to think about that. This is your moment. The designer approached, surveying Eleanor with critical eyes before breaking into a rare smile. You're perfect. Remember strong, confident steps. Show them what real beauty looks like. Eleanor nodded, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. The lineup shifted, models taking their positions. She was second to last, the position traditionally reserved for the designer's favorite. The music began, pulsing through the walls. One by one, the models disappeared through the curtain into a storm of flashing lights. Next, the stage manager pointed at Eleanor. She stepped onto the runway, and time seemed to slow. The lights were blinding. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, and cameras clicked in rapid succession. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, fear, giving way to a surge of pure confidence. She walked with deliberate grace, each step carrying the weight of her journey. The elegant evening gown flowed behind her like midnight water, its simplicity allowing her natural presence to shine. Eleanor kept her gaze forward, shoulders back, chin lifted not with arrogance but with self-assurance. Halfway down the runway, she allowed herself a single glance toward the front row. Margaret's face shone with tears and pride. And there, just where Daniel had said, sat Richard Caldwell. His customary mask of indifference had slipped. His mouth hung slightly open, eyes wide with disbelief, as his rejected daughter commanded the attention of the entire fashion world. Eleanor didn't break stride. She continued forward, reaching the end of the runway where she paused with practiced poise. The audience erupted in applause louder than for any model before her. Someone called out, "Authentic angel!" and others took up the chant. For her final pose, Eleanor did something unplanned. She smiled, not the practiced smile of a model, but the genuine smile of a woman who had found her worth. The crowd responded with thunderous approval. As she turned to walk back, she caught her father's expression one last time. He looked shaken to his core, his carefully constructed world visibly crumbling around him. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt no pain when she looked at him, only peace. Backstage, Eleanor was immediately surrounded by fellow models, makeup artists, and designers offering congratulations. The designer hugged her tightly. "You were magnificent," she whispered. "You've changed everything." When Eleanor finally broke free from the crowd, she found a quiet corner and closed her eyes. The cheers still echoed in her ears, but it wasn't the applause that filled her heart. It was the knowledge that she had walked that runway not for her father's approval, but for herself. She had taken her rejection and transformed it into triumph. No matter what happened next, whether she became the world's top model or never walked another runway, Eleanor Caldwell had proven her worth beyond any shadow of doubt. And in that moment, she was truly victorious. Eleanor's feet barely touched the ground as she left the venue. The evening air felt electric, carrying the echoes of applause that still rang in her ears. Daniel and Margaret waited by the car, both beaming with pride. "You were radiant." Margaret wrapped her in a tight embrace. Daniel's eyes shone. "I've never seen anything like it. The crowd loved you." They drove to a small celebration dinner at Eleanor's favorite restaurant. The owner recognized her immediately, escorting them to a private corner booth where champagne awaited. As they toasted her success, Eleanor's phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications. Friends, acquaintances, and industry contacts were all reaching out to congratulate her. "This feels like a dream," Eleanor admitted, taking a small sip of champagne. "I keep waiting to wake up." Margaret squeezed her hand. "It's real, sweetheart. All of it." By the time they finished dinner, Eleanor was exhausted but exhilarated. They returned to her apartment, where Daniel kissed her cheek before heading home. "Rest up," he told her. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day." Margaret stayed to help Eleanor unwind. They sat together on the couch, reminiscing about the evening's triumph. "I saw his face," Eleanor said softly. Dad looked shocked. "Good," Margaret replied. "It's about time Richard Caldwell was forced to see what he threw away." Eleanor's phone continued to buzz incessantly. "I should probably check these messages. My agent might need something for tomorrow." She opened her phone and froze. The smile slipped from her face. "Eleanor, what is it?" Margaret leaned closer. Eleanor's finger trembled as she scrolled through a flood of notifications. Not congratulations, but links to articles with headlines that made her stomach drop. Model fraud. Eleanor Caldwell's fabricated rejection story exposed. Sources reveal. Fashion's new darling invented tragic past for sympathy votes. Exclusive. The lies behind Eleanor Caldwell's rise to fame. A cold wave washed over Eleanor as she clicked on the first article. Anonymous sources claimed she had invented her rejection story to gain attention and fast-track her career. They alleged she'd never been estranged from her father and that her entire narrative was manufactured for publicity. "This can't be happening," Eleanor whispered. Margaret read over her shoulder, her face paling. "Who would do this?" Eleanor's phone rang her agent. With shaking hands, she answered. "Eleanor, don't panic. We'll handle this," her agent began, voice tense. "Just stay off social media tonight." But Eleanor couldn't look away from the screen. Comments poured in beneath the articles. "Always knew there was something fake about her. Using daddy issues to get ahead? Pathetic." Another privileged girl playing victim. Worse still was a statement attributed to Richard Caldwell himself. "I've never rejected my daughter. These claims are completely false. Eleanor is not and has never been estranged from our family." The room seemed to spin around her. After years of his silence and coldness, he had finally acknowledged her only to deny their painful history and make her look like a liar. "He's erasing everything," Eleanor whispered, tears blurring her vision. "He's erasing what he did to me." Margaret held her daughter as she began to shake. "We'll fight this. People know the truth." But as Eleanor scrolled through more comments and saw how quickly public opinion was turning against her, the victory of the runway faded into a distant memory. In its place grew a familiar, crushing weight, the feeling of being rejected all over again, but this time in front of the entire world. "And frankly, I don't appreciate my name being dragged into this publicity stunt," Richard's voice continued from the television. Eleanor stood frozen, remote control dangling from her limp fingers as the interview played out. The reporter pressed her microphone closer. "So, you're denying any connection to Eleanor Caldwell?" Richard's expression hardened, his perfectly tailored suit matching his perfectly rehearsed expression of indignation. "She is not my daughter." 5 simple words. A sentence that took less than 2 seconds to utter. Yet they sliced through Eleanor with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, reopening wounds she thought had begun to heal. Margaret gasped beside her. "That despicable man!" Eleanor's phone rang again, her agent for the 4th time that hour. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. Clear Glow Cosmetics is pulling out." Her agent's voice was clinical, detached. "And Sunny Day Apparel wants to pause their campaign with you. I'm doing damage control, but..." Eleanor barely heard the rest. She'd spent months working on those campaigns, both scheduled to launch next week. Her face on billboards, her story inspiring others. Now crumbling before her eyes. "We have another call coming in," her agent continued. "I'll update you later." The line went dead. Eleanor stared at the silent phone, then at the television where entertainment reporters now dissected her elaborate deception with gleeful enthusiasm. "They're spinning this like I orchestrated everything." Eleanor's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Like I made up being rejected just to get ahead." Margaret's hand found her shoulder. "We know the truth. Does it matter? Look what's happening." Eleanor gestured at her phone as another text arrived, the modeling agency requesting an emergency meeting tomorrow. "Everything I built is collapsing." Margaret tried to comfort her, but Eleanor barely registered her words. Her social media accounts overflowed with hateful comments. Former supporters now questioned every word she'd ever spoken. The authenticity that had made her special was now labeled calculated manipulation. By evening, Margaret reluctantly left to pick up some essentials, promising to return quickly. Daniel called twice, but Eleanor let it go to voicemail. She couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in his voice when he realized she wasn't the person he thought she was. Alone in her apartment, Eleanor wandered from room to room, touching the artifacts of her brief success magazine covers, professional photos, contract papers. Outside her window, the city continued its relentless pace, unconcerned with her private devastation. She found herself standing before the mirror, studying her reflection with critical eyes. The confidence she'd cultivated over months had vanished, replaced by the familiar shadow of shame. In the harsh bathroom light, she saw again the plain-faced little girl her father had dismissed. "Too ugly to be my daughter," she whispered, echoing words spoken a lifetime ago. Tears welled up, blurring her vision. One slipped down her cheek, then another, until they flowed freely. She sank to the floor, back against the bathtub, knees drawn to her chest. The truth twisted painfully in her heart. She'd built her entire career trying to prove her father wrong, seeking validation in the very industry that measured worth by appearance. And now, when it mattered most, he'd rejected her again publicly, definitively. "Maybe he was right all along," Eleanor whispered to the empty apartment. "Maybe I was never enough." The doorbell rang, startling Eleanor from her tears. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and pulled herself up from the bathroom floor. When she opened the door, Margaret stood there, arms laden with grocery bags, her face etched with concern. "I brought comfort food," Margaret said, taking in Eleanor's red-rimmed eyes and trembling lips. Eleanor tried to smile but couldn't manage it. "I'm not hungry." Margaret set the bags on the counter and pulled out a carton of ice cream anyway. "When you were little and had a bad day at school, we'd share ice cream and talk about the good things we still had." "This isn't a bad day at school, Mom. This is my life falling apart." Eleanor slumped onto the couch. "Everything I worked for is gone." Margaret sat beside her daughter and took her hands. "Eleanor, look at me." Eleanor reluctantly raised her eyes. "Your father was wrong when you were 7, and he's wrong now." Margaret's voice was steady, her grip firm. "Your worth has never been tied to his approval or anyone else's. But everyone believes him, not everyone." Margaret reached for her purse and pulled out her phone. "While I was at the store, I saw these." She opened her social media app and showed Eleanor a growing movement of support. Women sharing their own stories of rejection. Photos with captions like "Standing with Eleanor" and "True beauty comes from within." "Your story touched people," Margaret said, "and now they're standing by you." Eleanor scrolled through the posts, her vision blurring again but from a different kind of tears. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would they support me when everyone's saying I lied?" "Because truth resonates." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Remember what we always said during the hard times? Faith isn't faith until it's all you're holding on to." Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the familiar words wash over her. Through her childhood, those words had been their mantra through financial struggles, through nights when her father's absence left holes in their lives. "I've been chasing the wrong thing," Eleanor said quietly. "I wanted to prove him wrong so badly that I forgot to be true to myself." Margaret nodded. "You have nothing to prove to that man. The only approval you need is already yours." Eleanor leaned against her mother's shoulder, drawing strength from her unwavering presence. They sat in silence as the minutes ticked by, the ice cream forgotten on the counter. Finally, Eleanor straightened. "What do I do now? What does your heart tell you?" Eleanor thought about it. Not about her career or contracts, but about the girls who'd written to her saying they finally felt seen. About the women who recognized themselves in her journey. "I need to tell my story. The real story," she said, conviction growing with each word. "Not for sympathy or to hurt my father, but because it might help someone else who feels rejected." Margaret smiled. "That's my girl." Eleanor reached for her phone and hesitated. "What if no one listens?" "Then you'll still have spoken your truth." Margaret kissed her forehead. "And truth has a way of making itself heard." As if on cue, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Just saw the news. I believe in you. Call me when you're ready." Eleanor stared at the message, feeling something shift inside her. She stood and walked to her desk, pulling out a notebook and pen. "I'm going to write it all down first," she said, her voice stronger now. "My story, my words. No more hiding, no more shame." Margaret watched as Eleanor began to write, her hand moving steadily across the page. The light of determination had returned to her eyes, a light no rejection could extinguish. Eleanor wrote until her hand cramped, crossing out sentences, scribbling in margins, and starting fresh pages. Night fell, but she barely noticed. Words poured from her heart raw, honest words about rejection and resilience, about a little girl believing she wasn't pretty enough, and a young woman discovering her true strength. When her doorbell rang after midnight, she wasn't surprised to see Daniel standing there, camera bag slung over his shoulder. "I thought you might need company," he said, holding up a paper bag. "And sandwiches." Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile in days. "Come in." They sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by crumpled papers and half-empty tea mugs. "Read it to me," Daniel said, nodding at the notebook in her hands. Eleanor hesitated. "It's not perfect yet. It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be you." She took a deep breath and began reading. As the words filled the quiet apartment, Daniel watched her with unwavering attention. When she faltered over a particularly painful memory, he simply nodded for her to continue, his eyes reflecting not pity but profound respect. When she finished, silence hung between them. "Well?" she asked. "It's beautiful," he said, "because it's true." Eleanor set the notebook down. "I'm terrified of saying all this in public." "Of course you are." Daniel reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it." They spent the next hours refining her words. Daniel asked questions that helped her dig deeper, find clearer expressions. Not once did he try to change her message or soften her truth. Around 3 in the morning, Eleanor practiced standing at her makeshift podium, a stack of books on the counter. "I'm not looking for sympathy," she said, her voice gaining strength with each run-through. "And I'm not here to vilify my father. I'm sharing my story because, somewhere, someone else feels unseen, unworthy, or unloved. And they need to know they're not alone." Daniel recorded her on his phone, playing it back so she could hear herself. With each practice, her voice grew steadier, her posture more confident. "That's it," he said after the 5th run-through. "That's the Eleanor everyone needs to hear." She collapsed onto the couch beside him, exhausted but lighter somehow. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I just saw what was already there." Daniel smiled. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day." After he left, Eleanor showered, letting the warm water wash away tension from her shoulders. She would face cameras tomorrow, face judgment and scrutiny. But for the first time, she wasn't seeking validation. Standing before her bathroom mirror, hair still damp, she studied her reflection. The same face her father had once called plain looked back at her, but now she saw differently. She saw kindness in her eyes, determination in her jaw, and a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. "You are enough," she whispered to her reflection. "You have always been enough." The words hung in the air, simple but profound. Eleanor touched the mirror, a gentle promise to herself. "You are enough," she repeated, and this time she believed it. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the press conference venue an hour early. Her mother squeezed her hand tightly before taking a seat in the front row. Daniel stood discreetly to the side, camera ready, offering a reassuring nod. As reporters filed in, Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. When the room filled and the cameras turned toward her, she took a deep breath and stepped to the microphone. "My name is Eleanor Caldwell," she began, her voice soft but steady. 10 years ago, I was a little girl who drew a picture for her father." The room fell silent as Eleanor shared how she'd proudly presented her artwork, only to have her father look at her with cold disappointment. "He told me I wasn't pretty enough to be his daughter," she said, her words hanging in the air. "And for years, I believed him." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained clear as she described growing up feeling invisible, how she'd measure her worth by her reflection, always finding it lacking. "I didn't stumble into modeling because I thought I was beautiful," she continued. "I did it because for one brief moment, when I stood in for someone else at a charity show, people looked at me and actually saw me." As she spoke, faces in the audience softened. A few reporters set down their pens, simply listening. "The rumors you've heard are partly true. I am Richard Caldwell's daughter, though he's denied it publicly. And yes, I've struggled with insecurity my entire life." Eleanor paused, looking directly into the cameras. But that's not the whole story. She spoke about her mother's unwavering love, about Daniel's kindness, about finding strength and faith when everything else crumbled. "I'm not standing here to shame my father or to gain sympathy. I'm here because somewhere, someone feels unworthy or unseen, and they need to know they're not alone." Eleanor glanced at her mother, whose eyes shimmered with tears and pride. "True beauty isn't found in a perfect face. It's found in resilience, in kindness, in the courage to stand tall when the world tries to shrink you. Her final words resonated through the hushed room. To anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, you are. You always have been. For 3 heartbeats, complete silence filled the space. Then, starting slowly and building to a crescendo, applause thundered through the room. Reporters rose to their feet. Some wiped tears away discreetly. Eleanor stood, surprised by the response, as questions came pouring in. She answered each with honesty, neither hiding her pain nor exaggerating it. After the conference, her agent's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Within hours, clips of Eleanor's speech appeared online. By evening, it had been viewed millions of times. In her apartment that night, Eleanor watched in amazement as her words spread across social media. Comments flooded in. I felt invisible my whole life. Thank you for seeing me. Showing this to my daughter tonight. She needs to hear this. This isn't just about modeling or beauty. It's about human dignity. Margaret sat beside her on the couch, arm around her shoulders. You've touched hearts today, sweetheart. Eleanor's phone chimed with a text from Daniel. Your bravery is changing lives, including mine. She smiled, feeling a strange new lightness. For years, she'd carried the weight of trying to prove her father wrong. Now she realized the truth. His approval had never been the prize worth seeking. The real victory was finding her own voice and using it to lift others. The morning after her press conference, Eleanor woke to her phone buzzing non-stop. Bleary-eyed, she scrolled through notifications that had poured in overnight. Women from across the country had begun sharing their own stories using the hashtag #EnoughAZM. A middle-aged teacher in Ohio posted about being told she was too plain to find love, yet had celebrated her 20th wedding anniversary last month. A grandmother in Florida shared how she'd been passed over for promotions because she didn't have the right look, but eventually started her own successful business. A teenager in Seattle revealed how her father had walked out because she wasn't the son he wanted. Each story ended with the same powerful words Eleanor had spoken. You are enough. You always have been. Margaret brought coffee to Eleanor's bedroom, sitting beside her on the rumpled covers. Look at what you've started, she whispered, pointing to the screen where the stories continued to multiply. I never imagined. Eleanor's voice caught. I just wanted to tell the truth. Sometimes the truth is exactly what people need to hear. By midday, 3 major women's magazines had requested interviews. A leading cosmetics brand known for its inclusive campaigns reached out about a potential partnership. Even a publishing house contacted her agent about a possible memoir. Daniel arrived that afternoon with a folder of photographs. These are from yesterday, he said, spreading them across her kitchen table. I thought you might want to see yourself through someone else's eyes. The images showed Eleanor at the podium, not posed or polished, but radiating an authenticity that took her breath away. In each photo, she looked strong, determined, luminous with purpose. Is that really me? She asked, touching one photograph, where she stood with her chin lifted, eyes clear and direct. That's who you've always been, Daniel replied softly. The world's just finally catching up. Later that week, Eleanor visited a girls' youth center where teenagers gathered around her, eager to share their stories. One girl with a birthmark across her cheek asked how to handle bullies at school. Remember that their words show their limitations, not yours, Eleanor told her. Your mark doesn't define you, your heart does. As the days passed, Eleanor's scandal transformed into something unexpected, a movement. Fashion bloggers praised her courage. Social commentators discussed the harmful beauty standards she'd challenged. Former critics publicly apologized. The very industry that had once seemed ready to cast her aside now embraced her more fully, recognizing that Eleanor represented something rare, authenticity in a world of carefully crafted images. On Friday afternoon, exactly 10 days after the press conference, Eleanor's agent called with news. The competition committee has met, she said, her voice bright with excitement. They've unanimously decided that you're still eligible for the final round. Eleanor sat down, suddenly lightheaded. Really? Really. They said your response to adversity embodied exactly the kind of character they want in their winner. After hanging up, Eleanor stood by her apartment window, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. She thought about the little girl she'd been, clutching a drawing, desperate for her father's approval. That little girl could never have imagined this moment. The competition mattered, yes, but something far more important had already been won. The final round of the competition took place in the grand ballroom of the Pinnacle Hotel. Backstage hummed with nervous energy as stylists made last-minute adjustments and photographers captured behind-the-scenes moments. Eleanor stood quietly amid the chaos, breathing deeply as a makeup artist added finishing touches. 5 minutes, everyone, called the stage manager. Daniel appeared beside her, camera hanging from his neck. How are you feeling? Eleanor smiled, surprising herself with the calm certainty in her voice. Ready. For the first time, completely ready. The music started a powerful instrumental piece that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. One by one, the finalists walked the runway, each greeted by appreciative applause. Eleanor waited in the wings, last in line. She caught sight of Margaret in the front row, hands clasped as if in prayer. Beside her sat Daniel's empty chair, his camera equipment resting there, while he captured these final moments backstage. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. And finally, contestant number 12, Eleanor Caldwell. Eleanor stepped onto the runway, and something extraordinary happened. The cheers began before she'd taken 3 steps, not polite applause, but a thunderous welcome that washed over her like a wave. Signs appeared in the audience. Enough AZM. Women stood, eyes shining with recognition and solidarity. Eleanor walked not with the practiced steps she'd rehearsed, but with the natural grace of someone who had finally found her footing in the world. Her eyes remained forward, shoulders back, each step purposeful and strong. The simple emerald gown she wore caught the light, but it was her presence that commanded attention, the quiet dignity of someone who had faced rejection and emerged not broken, but whole. Halfway down the runway, her gaze fell on Richard. He sat rigid in his front row seat, his usual mask of cold composure cracked open. His eyes glistened with unmistakable tears, his mouth slightly parted, as if seeing her truly seeing her for the first time. His new wife whispered something, but he didn't respond, transfixed by the daughter he had once dismissed. Eleanor felt no triumph at his emotion, no vindictive satisfaction. Instead, a profound peace settled over her. She continued her walk, turning at the end of the runway with a fluid grace that spoke of inner strength rather than practiced perfection. When all 12 finalists stood lined up on stage, Eleanor breathed deeply, centered in the knowledge that regardless of the outcome, she had already won something far more valuable than any title. The head judge stepped forward, envelope in hand. The spotlights intensified and the room fell silent. This year's competition has been unlike any other, he began. We've seen not just beauty, but courage. Not just grace on the runway, but grace under pressure. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, thinking of her journey from the little girl with a drawing to the woman standing tall under the lights. The judge's decision was unanimous, the announcer continued. Our winner exemplifies everything this competition stands for: resilience, authenticity, and the ability to inspire others. The pause seemed eternal. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to announce this year's winner, Eleanor Caldwell. The room erupted. Flowers appeared in Eleanor's arms. Contestants embraced her. Through happy tears, she saw Margaret standing, applauding wildly, Daniel capturing it all through his lens. In that moment of triumph, Eleanor knew her worth wasn't measured by the crown being placed on her head, but by the journey that had brought her here, standing in her truth, enough exactly as she was. The crowd's cheers gradually subsided as Eleanor stepped into a quieter corner backstage. She carefully placed her trophy on a table and took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. The congratulatory hugs and handshakes had finally paused, giving her a moment of peace. Eleanor, the voice stopped her cold. She turned to find Richard standing awkwardly by the curtain, his usual commanding presence diminished. His eyes darted around the room before settling on her face. I'd like to speak with you, he said, his voice lacking its customary authority. Privately, if possible. Eleanor nodded, her heart racing despite her outward calm. They moved to a small sitting area away from the bustle of the post-show activities. Richard cleared his throat. You were, he paused, searching for words that had never come easily to him. You were remarkable tonight. Thank you, Eleanor said simply. I need to tell you something. Richard's hands fidgeted with his tie. I was wrong. About you. About everything. What I said when you were a child. I remember every word, Eleanor said, her voice steady. Richard flinched. I know, I can't take that back. But seeing you now, what you've become, despite my cruelty. He leaned forward. I'd like another chance, to be your father again. Eleanor studied the man before her, smaller somehow than the giant who had cast such a long shadow over her childhood. She felt no anger, only a deep, settled clarity. I forgive you, she said. Hope flickered across his face. Not because you deserve it, Eleanor continued gently, but because holding on to that pain was hurting me, not you. I forgive you because I choose freedom. I understand, Richard nodded eagerly. We can start fresh. I can help your career, my connections. Eleanor shook her head, stopping him. No, I don't think you do understand. Forgiveness doesn't mean we go back. It doesn't mean you get to step into my life and claim what you once threw away. But I'm your father, he protested. You're the man who gave me life, Eleanor corrected. But fatherhood is earned through love, not blood. My path forward is my own to walk. Richard's shoulders sagged. What would you have me do? Live your life. Be kind to your new daughter. Learn from your mistakes. Eleanor's voice softened. I wish you well, but I don't need your approval anymore. I never did. The words hung between them, not harsh, but final. Richard stood slowly, a mixture of regret and reluctant understanding on his face. He reached into his pocket and placed a small, worn photograph on the table. Eleanor, at 5 years old, gap-toothed and smiling. I kept this, he said. All these years. Eleanor looked at the photo but didn't take it. Keep it. Remember what matters. Richard nodded once, straightened his shoulders through sheer habit, and walked away. No dramatic exit, no final plea, just the quiet departure of a man facing the consequences of his choices. Eleanor watched him go, feeling neither victory nor loss, only the gentle closing of a door. Sweetheart? Margaret appeared at her side, concern in her eyes. Are you all right? Eleanor turned to her mother, the one who had stayed, who had believed, who had loved without conditions, and fell into her embrace. I'm free, Eleanor whispered against her mother's shoulder. Really and truly free. Margaret held her tight, tears flowing freely down both their faces. In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of her professional triumph, Eleanor found her greatest victory was much simpler, the peace of knowing exactly who she was and that it had always been enough. The city lights twinkled below as Eleanor pressed her palm against the cool glass. Her reflection stared back the face that had once been deemed not enough now graced billboards across the country. She smiled at the irony. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Daniel, camera bag slung over his shoulder, holding 2 cups of steaming tea. Thought you might need this, he said, stepping inside. Chamomile. For celebration and reflection. Eleanor accepted the cup gratefully. How did you know I was doing both? Because I know you. Daniel set his camera down and joined her by the window. Your eyes get this faraway look when you're piecing things together. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below. Eleanor felt a strange gratitude washing over her, not just for her success, but for the rejection that had shaped her path. You know what's strange? She said finally. If my father had accepted me, loved me as I was, I might never have discovered my strength. She traced the rim of her cup. His rejection was the stone that sharpened me. Daniel nodded. Some people build us up, others knock us down. Both shape who we become. My mother built, he broke, and you. Eleanor turned to face him fully. You saw. I just pointed the camera, Daniel shrugged. The light was already there. Eleanor shook her head. No, when everyone else was looking for flaws, you looked for truth. That first day in the studio, when I was terrified, you told me to forget the camera and just be. Best advice I ever gave. Daniel smiled. The world doesn't need more perfect faces. It needs more authentic hearts. Eleanor set down her tea and reached for the portfolio on the nearby desk, her very first shoot with Daniel. The photos revealed a nervous girl with uncertainty in her eyes but grace in her stance. I barely recognize her, Eleanor whispered. I do, Daniel said softly. She's still there, just stronger now. Eleanor closed the portfolio, her fingers lingering on the cover. We've been offered the Paris campaign. 6 months overseas, shooting at all the iconic locations. That's incredible, Daniel beamed. You deserve it. They asked for you specifically, Eleanor added. Said no one else captures me quite the same way. Daniel's expression shifted, surprise giving way to quiet joy. Both of us? In Paris? If you want it, Eleanor said, her voice suddenly shy. Daniel stepped closer, his hand finding hers. I want it. But more than that. He took a steadying breath. I want you. Not the model, not the face on magazines. You, Eleanor. The woman who laughs at my terrible jokes and steals my last fry and sees beauty in broken things. Eleanor felt warmth spreading through her chest. When did you know? Probably that day you spilled coffee all over my expensive lens and looked more concerned about the coffee than the equipment. His eyes crinkled. But I've been falling a little more every day since. Eleanor's free hand reached up to touch his face. I think I started falling the moment you told me to forget about being beautiful and just be real. Their first kiss tasted of chamomile and promise. 3 weeks later, they stood in the terminal, boarding passes in hand. Margaret hugged them both, whispering prayers and love in equal measure. Call me when you land, she insisted, smoothing Eleanor's coat collar. And remember who you are, no matter what Paris thinks. I will, Eleanor promised. I know exactly who I am now. As they walked toward the gate, Daniel's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. Behind them stretched the path of heartbreak and triumph that had led them here. Ahead lay Paris, with its lights and opportunities and unknown challenges. Eleanor squeezed Daniel's hand as they stepped onto the plane, feeling neither too much nor too little, simply perfectly enough. 6 months after arriving in Paris, Eleanor stood backstage at Fashion Week, surrounded by the controlled chaos of models, designers, and stylists. The buzz of conversations in multiple languages filled the air as assistants rushed past with racks of clothing and makeup artists made final touches. 2 minutes, Eleanor, called the stage manager. Eleanor closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her journey flashed before her, from the little girl crying over her father's cruel words to this moment, about to step onto one of the most prestigious runways in the world. Someone squeezed her hand. She opened her eyes to find the lead designer smiling at her. "You are our star tonight," he said in his thick French accent. "The dress was made for you." The gown she wore was a masterpiece of silk and delicate beadwork, catching light with every movement. But unlike the nervous girl from her first runway show, Eleanor now knew the gown wasn't what made her shine. "Places, everyone." The music began, a powerful, driving beat that seemed to match the rhythm of Eleanor's heart. One by one, models disappeared through the curtain onto the catwalk. Then came her turn. Eleanor stepped onto the runway, and the world transformed. Camera flashes burst like stars, momentarily blinding her. The audience sat in reverent silence before breaking into appreciative murmurs and applause. She glided forward with practiced grace, each step deliberate yet seemingly effortless. Near the end of the runway, she spotted them, Margaret and Daniel, in the front row. Her mother's eyes glistened with tears, hands clasped as if in prayer. Beside her, Daniel wasn't looking through his camera lens for once, just watching her with unmasked adoration. Eleanor paused at the end of the runway, giving the photographers their moment. As flashbulbs popped around her, she allowed herself a genuine smile, not the practiced one she'd been taught, but the one that reached her eyes and came from deep within. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about poses or angles. She was thinking of the journey, the rejection that had nearly broken her, the kindness that had saved her, the love that had transformed her. When she turned to walk back, she caught sight of a familiar face several rows back, her father. Their eyes met briefly. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, a look of what might have been regret crossing his features. Eleanor didn't falter. She simply continued her walk, her posture straight, her head high. After the final walk with all models, the audience rose in a standing ovation. The designer took Eleanor's hand, bringing her forward for special recognition. "The face of our new global campaign," he announced proudly. Later, as assistants helped models change backstage, Eleanor found a quiet corner. She touched the delicate pendant at her neck, a gift from Daniel and Margaret before the show. A small silver camera charm and a tiny heart joined together. "You were magnificent," Daniel said, appearing with Margaret behind him. He handed her a bouquet of wildflowers rather than the typical roses. Margaret embraced her, whispering, "So proud of you, my brave girl." Eleanor looked in the mirror one last time before leaving. The lights caught the sparkle in her eyes, the confident tilt of her chin, the serenity in her smile. "True beauty was in me all along," she whispered to herself. As they left the venue together, the photographer who saw her truth, the mother who believed in her worth, and the woman who had finally found her light, Eleanor knew she had won something far more valuable than fame. She had won herself. If you enjoyed the story of Eleanor Caldwell, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.